Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another Mortgage Coach coaching call. My name is Dave Savage. I'm the CEO of Mortgage Coach. If you have not already connected with me and Mortgage Coach on LinkedIn, on Facebook, this video will be recorded. It will be posted like all of our calls in our YouTube channel. And hopefully, as Mortgage Coach members, you've all downloaded our apps. So you guys all know, our focus is helping families make confident decisions by providing them with the insight and education they need. So, we are dedicated to education and training. This actually just last month represented 7 years and over 400 interviews like the one we're doing today. Now, typically, I'm interviewing top loan officers. I'm interviewing authors, inspiring people. Last week, I interviewed Dave Ramsey. I also interviewed Kelly Zitlow, top producer. So it's about selling. Today's call with Richard it's about compliance, but let's face it, in the mortgage industry, we've got to learn how to sell compliantly. So Richard Horn, thanks for taking time to join us. Your backstory with the CFPB and TRID, I think, is going to make for an interesting conversation.
Thank you, Dave, for inviting me. I think this is definitely going to be an interesting conversation, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and all your attendees.
Great. Well, Richard, you have come highly recommended. Not only, your resume kind of speaks for itself, but a lot of compliance officers have recommended that I bring you in. We've interviewed Mitch Kiter. We're always trying to help loan officers do the right thing. And so thanks for making time. There will be compliance people on this call. There will be loan officers. I did want to do a couple reviews from last week. So last week we interviewed Dave Ramsey. And while he said a lot of things that I connected with that I thought made a lot of sense, there's nothing that made more sense than this. When helping with money, whether it's insurance, real estate, investments, you should always be looking for someone with the heart of a teacher, not the heart of a salesman. And I think as we come into TRID, that made sense to me last year. It made sense to me 18 years ago when I founded Mortgage Coach. It makes even more sense today. Also, a highlight from last week, in the interview that we did with Kelly Zitlow, her mission. My mission is to deliver an honest, well-communicated, knowledge-based lending experience. So, Kelly, if you're on this call, thank you for the leadership you brought. If you're on this call, I recommend everybody listens to this. Kelly's been a very successful mortgage professional for over a decade, and one of the reasons why she's integrating Mortgage Coach into her workflow now more than ever is because of TRID. She knows it's important that when you quote rates and fees to a family, you've got graphs and charts, and you're able to integrate a video into the conversation. So Kelly, thanks for all your leadership last week, and Mortgage Coach members, if you missed that call, make sure you check it out. Also, I wanted to, Kelly mentioned this 3-day disclosure rule document. She mentioned how she had done a video on it. We have put this in the handouts. So if you notice, there is the Kelly Zitlow TRID 3-day closing chart. Kelly, I think you'll like to know, in preparation for this call, I asked Richard, hey Richard, one of our loan officers last week, said that this was the best one she's seen. Do you know of any others? And Richard, what was your comment on this particular document?
I think she picked definitely the right document to explain this part of the rule. The American Land Title Association put together a great chart. I'm glad that she's using it. There have been imitations, but this was the first one I've seen to really lay it out as clearly as this chart does.
Good. So there's a tool to kick off the call for everybody. So Richard, let's get into our interview. Everyone, I've put Richard's contact information up on the screen. If you have more questions for all the head of compliance, we've got thousands of loan officers, Richard, that subscribe as individual LOs, and then we have over 100 lenders that are members as an enterprise. So I want to make sure everybody knows how to contact Richard after the call. I will show this information again, but if you could answer this. Well, first of all, why don't we do this? Why don't you give us a little bit on your backstory for people that don't know? Well, all the compliance people do, the loan officers might not, and then we'll get into the question itself.
Great. One correction on my contact information, so you don't end up calling the wrong person. My phone number is 696-1525, not 1225. So just make sure that you do not end up calling whoever that poor person is with that phone number, who will be receiving probably hopefully many calls.
All right. Well, by the way, I fixed it on the screen, and thank you for that, Richard.
Oh, fantastic. Great. So yeah, that's a great question about my backstory, and it definitely helps your attendees know why you invited me to speak here on this webinar. I was the Senior Counsel and Special Advisor at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau who led the final TRID rule. I also led the design and consumer testing of the TRID disclosures, which really started very early on in the CFPB's lifespan. The design of the forms and consumer testing started back in January 2011. But before that, I was actually a senior attorney at the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation in the New York regional office of the FDIC, where I supported the supervision staff on both risk management as well as consumer compliance issues. And before that, I was in private practice for a number of years as some of the industry's leading law firms in regulatory compliance. So I've got a lot of background. I had a lot of background in this area before I started at the CFPB, but definitely I learned a lot about the consumer experience while working at the CFPB on this rule. And I think that that's one of the things I'm most proud of about this rule, is that I think it will definitely bring a lot of benefits to consumers and aid in their understanding of the mortgage loan transaction that they're entering into.
Beautiful. So let's get into the first question. So folks, I do think we will have some time at the end for questions, and I also think there's a good chance that Richard would be open to coming on another call and answering questions. I mean, he's really, you can tell he's got the heart of a teacher, and he really wants to help families and make a difference. So feel free to put all questions in the GoToMeeting. While we may not get all the questions answered, put those in the GoToMeeting under questions, and I'll get to the ones that I can. But Richard, let's kick off this first question. I mean, TRID is a change to improve customer understanding. If you could just share a bit about why TRID. My goal with this call is that every mortgage coach loan officer, not only do they serve the family, but they have a competitive edge against, let's just call it, average loan officers. So I think some of the why and how we got here will really help arm the mortgage coach loan officer with a unique perspective. I'm going to share the desktop so that you can share your screen. And if you could, I know you've got a bit of a presentation, but answer that question, and you can share your desktop anytime now.
Great. So let's see if that works. Can you see my screen?
Absolutely.
Perfect. And I really like the way you said that. It's about educating consumers, and that's what I wanted to talk about here. TRID's main goal was to aid consumer understanding. That's why Congress required the CFPB to integrate the two disclosures under TILA and RESPA into one integrated disclosure. Just because I think we all knew from the housing bubble that the forms that were in place at that time really weren't helping consumers, weren't educating consumers about the risks that were involved in the transactions that they were taking, especially with some of the more exotic products. And also, they just weren't educating consumers about some of the basics, like what was the amount of the check that they would need to bring to closing, and what would their financial situation look like on a time horizon that they can really wrap their head around, which we'll talk about. And so I think Congress recognized that the current forms at that time weren't helping. The TIL also, the Truth in Lending Statement, it doesn't include any information that consumers actually want to see or use. The Truth in Lending Statement has the APR, the finance charge, the amount financed, and the total of payments, which are very important for compliance purposes. And I can see, or I imagine a lot of the compliance folks on this call nodding their heads at that statement, but they're pretty much useless to consumers, and probably a lot of your LO attendees are nodding their heads to that statement. Even in my own closing, just a funny story, when I bought my house, I was at the closing table. Of course, I didn't tell anybody what I did for a living, especially not the settlement agent. The settlement agent hands me the TIL and says, "This is your confusion and lending statement." And I just cracked up, because that's exactly what it is. And these forms have been around for decades, and it's taken this amount of time for for them to be revised to actually be understandable to consumers. It's kind of shocking how long we've lived with forms that we knew weren't actually educating consumers. It really took, I think, the financial crisis to come to this point, to bring us to the point where we have that now what some have called a holy grail, an actually integrated disclosure that was designed with the consumer in mind. As you all know, the final rule was issued in November 2013, so almost 2 years ago at this point. It was a rather lengthy rule, about 1,900 pages. So you often hear the joke that the CFPB took 1,900 pages to issue a 3-page or 5-page disclosure, but it's actually there was a lot of work that went into it, because I think there's a lot of compliance requirements that are involved in these disclosures. These disclosures are not only just about educating consumers, but they're also a record of compliance in some ways for the industry, both for the lenders, but also in the secondary market. Many rely on these forms to actually see what was charged to the consumer and whether it was compliant with the statutory requirements. So that's why one of the other purposes was to facilitate compliance with the disclosure requirement. But the main goal was to really educate consumers so that they could understand their transactions, have information that was actually understandable and usable for them, so not the Fed box, not the APR, finance charge and total payments. And to make sure that these forms are understandable to consumers, we did a lot of consumer testing with them. We contracted with Climate Communication Group, which is a firm that specializes in form design and usability research. And with their help, we designed prototype disclosures and tested them over 10 rounds in 9 different cities across the country before the proposal. And after the proposal, we did even more testing. We did 7 additional rounds of the usability testing, and then an extensive 858-person quantitative test, where after we had the proposed disclosures that we were comfortable with, we actually wanted to see in a quantitative test how they performed against the current forms. So we kind of put the 2 disclosure regimes head-to-head in a battle royale, and we wanted to see which ones won. And luckily, the integrated disclosures beat out the current forms, which I guess to some is not a surprise. The improvement in consumers' understanding of their transactions was statistically significant and pretty large. There was a 29% improvement in consumers' ability to understand their transactions using the new integrated disclosure. So that's quite a substantial improvement in consumer understanding. I wanted to kind of show you. Yes.
Hey, Richard, if I could, so mortgage professionals, I want you to really hear what was said there, because I know there's so, I get a lot of people sending me information what they don't like, and let's just say critical comments. And I want to just, say, I mean, our mission is we can't change it. These are the rules, whether you like them, whether you don't. Now let's have a great attitude and turn them into a competitive advantage. So I want to make sure that within this call, you're getting some things that will be useful for you to have when you're talking to a realtor and when you're talking to a family. So Richard, if you could one more time, how many total people were in this analysis that you did?
So for the qualitative usability testing, which is essentially what private companies do when they test their own products, like if they're testing software or a new consumer product, or even taste testing, they'll actually put a consumer in a room with the product and see how they use it, ask them questions about it. We didn't do focus groups. It wasn't a group of consumers using the disclosures. We actually did one-on-one interviews for about 90 minutes with the prototype disclosures that we were testing in that round. And we saw how they used them. We saw what their pain points were, and they actually would give us suggestions on what would be clearer for them. And the questions and things we learned related to the loan terms, whether their interest rate was fixed or adjustable. Also, what was the clearest display of their monthly payments, as well as the clearest displays of their closing costs. And through that process, we really made a lot of design changes to the forms. And we did that with over 100 consumers across the country. And actually, one thing to mention, we didn't just test in that way with consumers. We did actually test with loan officers and settlement agents across the country with the prototype disclosures in that qualitative usability testing. We put loan officers in front of the forms, asked them to explain the forms as they would to a consumer to make sure that they would be able to explain transactions using the forms. And a lot of the loan officers really told us that the forms were a substantial improvement over the current forms. They found it easier to explain the loan terms, whether the loan was fixed or adjustable, how high the payments might go if it was an adjustable rate loan. Also, it was easier to explain the closing costs than with the current GFE, which again is probably not a surprise to many. I think this form definitely is an improvement in disclosing closing costs, which we'll get to in a little bit. But through that qualitative usability testing, we got some pretty great feedback from the loan officers that we were testing with, but also the settlement agents. Settlement agents said that it would be easier to explain the closing disclosure to consumers because the closing disclosure, which is the form that integrates the final till and the HUD-1 settlement statement, because we designed the loan estimate and the closing disclosure to match exactly, so consumers would have a greater idea of how their costs were changing, and it was easier then to explain the closing disclosure to consumers because of their greater understanding and because the form is just designed to be more usable by consumers. Loan officers responded so well that some of the quotes they gave us were that this was the best mortgage form they've ever seen. I mean, we had responses that were that ecstatic about these disclosures during testing. I know that they represent a huge change for compliance. They represent a huge change in vocabulary as well, which we'll see in later slides. And so, change is hard, I know, but I think that they'll be a lot easier to explain once you get used to the change vocabulary and the change in process. It'll be a lot easier to explain to consumers. And when you're trying to win the trust of consumers, I think it'll be easier to do that with the current forms because it'll look like you're not hiding things on these new disclosures. It'll look like the way you explain it to the consumer, and this is what we learned from our usability testing, the way you explain it to a consumer is really the way it's laid out in the form and the way that a consumer understands the transaction. So there's not a great divergence between the way you explain the closing costs, for example, and the way they're displayed on the GFE currently. It's not the situation where things are moved into different categories on the way you explain it, with like you have with the current GFE on the loan estimate. It's laid out in a way that's understandable to everybody. Sorry for that long-winded explanation.
No, it's good. Well, I think everybody, my takeaway was hundreds of families and realtors went through quantitative testing of the new TRID disclosures compared to past disclosures, and there was a 29% improvement in understanding. That's a beautiful thing. And by the way, I am one of the people, while there are some things in TRID which we're going to talk about that I'm critical of, and I think others can be critical of, they are the best disclosures that have ever come into our industry, and it's a great body of work. So continue with your comment. I just wanted to make sure we netted out some of those things that will help mortgage coach loan officers net this out and bring it with a positive light to realtors and to families. So continue.
Yeah, so I did want to talk just briefly about the design process that we use because it is very different from the way other agencies have designed disclosures in the past. We started with a blank slate. We didn't just list out every single statutory requirement that we had to comply with and just put that in order on the forms. We started from the perspective of the consumer. And we, as a team, sat in a room and brainstormed about what would be important for a consumer to know at the application stage and also at the closing stage. And this picture is from February 2011, very early in the design process, when I had a lot more brown hair. But this is basically us just writing down our ideas on sticky pads on the walls, and that's how the disclosure design process started. It was very, very different from the way other agencies have designed disclosures. And the results of that different design process, the different perspective that we had in trying to aid consumer understanding and not just follow the statutory requirements, as well as a significant amount of consumer testing, like you mentioned. We did a huge quantitative test with 858 people We did qualitative testing with over 100 consumers across the country. And the result was that these forms are recognized as being basically easy for consumers to understand, that they're a significant improvement over the current disclosures, and they won an award from the Center for Plain Language. They actually won the Center for Plain Language's Grand Clearmark Award, which is for the best plain language document of the year. The loan estimate won this award in 2014. So that's it's probably a first that a government disclosure, especially a complicated disclosure like a mortgage disclosure, has won a plain language award. But you know, that's because of the significant improvement that these disclosures will bring to consumers. And I should just briefly mention some of the basics of the rule, so we all know what we're talking about. The loan estimate, or the LE for short, combines the initial truth in lending statement and the good faith estimate, and the closing disclosure, or the CD for short, combines the final truth in lending statement and the HUD-1 settlement statement. To make sure we have enough time for the rest of our discussion, I'm going to skip over most of these bullets here, except for to mention that we design these forms differently, as I mentioned on the previous slide. But the result of that is that it has less text on the form and a more graphic design, so consumers can more easily scan the page and find what they're looking for. And we also try to emphasize the most important and usable information for a consumer earlier in the disclosures, because we knew that consumers would be using these probably in busy times during the day. If they're at work, they get the disclosures from their loan officer. They may have a couple minutes to read it before they move on to their next work task. So we wanted to make sure that the most important information that they wanted to see was earlier in the forms, on the earlier first or earlier pages of the forms. Also, we took off educational information from the forms. Right now, the GFE has a lot of educational information on it, telling consumers about the tolerances and how their interest rate may change with changes in points. We knew that borrowers could get that information from other advisors and websites and from their loan officers. So we took that educational information off of the disclosures because we knew that they would be able to seek it out from other sources like you, the loan officer. So while the information about the loan is there, I think the explanation needs to come from somebody else, and that is the loan officer. So here you have a disclosure that provides the basics of the loan in a clear format, and it's your opportunity to explain all of this to a consumer, because the form won't be explaining to them what's going on. And so here is page 1 of the loan estimate. Dave, do you want to walk through this first, or do you want to talk about a different topic?
No, I'll let you go through this, provide some overview, and then I'll ask some questions in a minute.
Great. So this is page 1 of the loan estimate. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I did want to point out that loan terms section in the middle of the page, where on the current till the Fed box would likely be, here you have the loan amount, not the amount financed. You have the interest rate, not the APR, and you have the principal and interest payment. This is a huge improvement in consumer understanding and usability, because these are the pieces of information that consumers want to know about their transaction, and the pieces of information that they do use. There is a question to the right of that says, can this amount increase after closing? And that tells the consumer essentially whether those amounts will increase. And if they will, it gives a yes answer with bullets to the right that give them more detailed information about those increases. It gives them the maximum amounts of those of the interest rate and the principal and interest, or the loan amount if that increases if you have neg am, as well as the frequency of the changes for those amounts. And so this is very important, useful information for consumers that's displayed in a very clear and understandable way. Instead of calling it negative amortization or an adjustable rate loan, it just tells the consumers what they want to know. Will this amount go up? Will it increase? And so this will provide a very easy way for consumers first to tell whether they have an adjustable rate loan or a fixed rate loan, but also whether there are any other features that will increase the payment. This loan is a 5-year interest only, 5-3 adjustable rate loan. So you do have some additional information on here about the interest-only period. So that will also be communicated to the borrower on the forms as well. Another thing I wanted to mention is that this is an early stage in the process for a consumer, but at the very bottom of page 1, you have the estimated cash to close amount. That's something that we learned about from our consumer research that would be useful for consumers to have even at this early stage. That's the grand total of that check that the borrower will need to bring to closing. It gives the borrower the amount of the down payment, of their closing costs, and any other costs that they'll need to bring to closing. That could be very useful for consumers to really see that they'll need to have a substantial amount of money budgeted to be able to close on a transaction. And this is page 2. As I mentioned, the loan estimate discloses closing costs very differently from the current GFE, and the current GFE discloses closing costs very differently from the way you're probably explaining them to your customers. But here we try to display them in a way that's understandable for consumers and also is easy for you to explain. As I mentioned, we did consumer testing not just with consumers but also with loan officers to make sure that they could explain the transaction to the consumer using the integrated disclosures, and so that was definitely factored into this design. You basically have origination charges, services that are required by the creditor, and then to the right you have other real estate type of costs like taxes and recording fees. They're all laid out and they're all itemized. That's another difference from the GFE. Instead of having lump sum costs, you're going to have itemized costs so that not only your borrower can see exactly where their money is going in the transaction, but you can explain to them what they're paying for and actually bring some light to why there are potentially significant closing costs in a transaction. So this is an opportunity to explain that to consumers, and it's also, I think, going to reduce some of the confusion for consumers because of the itemization. The other thing that we learned from consumer testing, though, is that consumers are very activated by seeing an itemized list of closing costs. That's the way our consumer research firm, Climate Communication Group, described it, that when consumers saw an itemized list of closing costs, they ended up asking more questions. They ended up asking more questions not just about the closing costs that they were seeing, but they were asking more questions about the loan terms in general, and they indicated that they would negotiate more. And we did see that. They were asking more questions about, well, can they bargain for a better deal? Could they ask for a reduction in their interest rate by paying more points and so on? So this itemized list of closing costs might result in having more quote-unquote activated consumers that you're dealing with, and so it might increase the amount of questions and negotiation that you might see from your customers.
So I want to jump in here. So, again, my goal is to prepare the mortgage coach loan officer to do an amazing job of educating families and to do an amazing job. At the end of the day, they're salespeople. They want to win the business over other lenders. So while there's been a tremendous amount of TRID prep around what the disclosures, how they work, what to do, I think, for all you mortgage professionals who are on this call, you got to really prepare. It's time. You're going to be asked more questions. In my analysis, and from what I'm hearing from a lot of great mortgage professionals, everybody recognized that the initial consultation, there's going to be some changes to it. And because this borrower conversation is going to be more educational, it's going to take longer. And then, again, I'm not going to get ahead of our conversation here, but there's also going to be an increase in the amount of conversations you need to have with families and with realtors. And there's going to be a new standard, a higher standard of how you manage, how you communicate, how you educate, and how you manage the expectations of the family and the realtor. So there's really, there's a lot of details that everybody needs to learn, but be prepared. You're going to be asked more questions. Make sure you really understand this. And, while you're getting asked questions from the clients, you're not like, new questions are going to be asked. So Richard, let's get into page 3 because it starts to really get into mortgage coach land, and then let's kind of talk about the pre-LE conversation because, while this is the LE, this is the new loan estimate, there's a conversation that everybody on this call is going to start to have pre-LE so that that customer is informed, that customer makes a great decision, and when they get this LE, they understand it. You manage their expectations better.
Great. Yeah, definitely let's move to page 3 because there is some very useful information on page 3 that consumers can use to compare different transactions, and we'll talk about why that's important also. Page 3 has on the top of the page some contact information for the lender and the broker. Again, it's going to be easier for the borrower to find that contact information and then actually send questions, either email or by phone call, to you because it's laid out more clearly. Underneath that is a table called comparisons table, and essentially this table tells consumers to use these numbers to compare with other loans. So right there, the form is even telling the borrower, hey, you can shop around, you can find other loans to compare with this loan. Underneath that are some text disclosures. As I mentioned, we tried to emphasize the most important and usable information earlier in the form, so the text disclosures that you're familiar with ended up at the bottom of page 3. So that's, it's not because consumers shouldn't read them, but it's just because they're less likely to need them or use them. And then underneath that's an optional signature line that you can use to confirm your customer's receipt of the loan estimate. But really the important part of this page I want to talk about is the comparisons table. Here's it up close. The first number here I think is a huge improvement in disclosures for consumers. This first number is in 5 years. Basically, we looked at the total of payments number that's currently on the till, which totals up all the payments over the entire loan term for consumers. For many loans, that will be payments over 30 years. Even for 15-year loans, that's that's going to be a significant number. But for 30-year loans, that's going to be a huge number. The only real value of that huge number for consumers is shock value. They'll look at it and say, wow, that's a lot of money. This is crazy. And then they'll move on and sign the note because they want to buy the house. We tried to give consumers something that was more usable. We essentially truncated the total of payments down to the first 5 years of the transaction to give them a number that they can more easily wrap their head around. And the first row of this in 5 years disclosure is the dollar amount that the consumer will pay in principal, interest, mortgage insurance, if there is any, and in their loan costs, which are essentially the lender's side of the closing costs. And underneath that, a row for the amount of principal that they'll have paid off over the first 5 years. That's supposed to give the consumer an idea of the equity that they're building in the property during these first 5 years. The question comes up, and I think, Dave, you've asked this to me before, well, how did you get to 5 years? What's the story behind that? And the reason is that that's the amount of time, roughly, according to consumer research, that consumers use to evaluate financial transactions. When they're thinking about whether to enter into a financial transaction, they don't think 30 years out, where am I going to be, or even 15 years out, where am I going to be? They think, well, where am I going to be in 5 years? And then we also considered the average lifespan of a loan, how long a consumer stays in a house or how long it takes until they actually refinance a loan. And that's also between 4 and 7 years. So we put that together and came up with a time frame that would be easier for consumers to wrap their heads around, was more meaningful to them, and then also was more realistic in terms of how long consumers stayed in loans. And so that's how we got to in 5 years. So I think consumers considering this could really decide, well, does this make sense? But they could also use it to compare with other transactions, even loans that are offered by the same lender. So a consumer could be considering 2 different loans, a 15-year and a 30-year fixed, and then this in 5 years number could make a difference to them. They could see that they're paying less interest over the first 5 years, and that they might be building up more principal, or might be paying more principal. So these are things that consumers could use not just to shop between lenders, but to consider different options at one lender. And so it can be very useful to loan officers as well.
No doubt. So at Mortgage Coach, I mean, we're a huge fan of the 5 years. That's something that we've been helping loan officers to present for families for 18 years. So I've always felt when you get into debt, look at the cost, the total cost of that debt over the time that you're likely to have it, and compare that to other options. I mean, that's I think, just a massive win for families. And I also think it's a great win for the mortgage industry as a whole. Now, TIP, what is the backstory on that? Because, I mean, that is something that I myself, I mean, we've got total cost makes total sense. APR can be confusing. What's the backstory on TIP, and what was the intention here?
Yeah. So for all of the improvements in consumer understanding on this form, the TIP really stands out as something that could be potentially confusing to consumers. Unfortunately, while Congress did have a great idea in the Dodd-Frank Act of integrating the disclosures under TILA and RESPA, they added a new disclosure to TILA at the same time, which essentially requires the disclosure to the consumer of the total amount of interest that they'll pay over the life of the loan, expressed as a percentage of the principal amount of the loan. And so, unfortunately, this is a statutory requirement that we had to deal with in the integrated disclosures. We evaluated whether we could use our interpretive authority under the TILA statute to exempt creditors from providing this disclosure on the loan estimate, but to evaluate whether we should use that authority, we had to test it. And so we included this disclosure, which we ended up calling the total interest percentage, or the TIP for short, which is a great acronym for it. We ended up testing it in our usability testing before the proposal, and it ended up not bombing, for lack of a better word, as much as we thought it would. Consumers generally understood that a lower TIP would be better. I think that this disclosure, although it doesn't really tell the consumer any information about the important parts of the loan, where the risks are in the loan, like if the loan has an adjustable rate or neg am or an interest-only feature, but it does give the consumer a general idea of how much interest they're paying in the loan, and they understood that lower was better. Because it didn't bomb, we proposed to include it on the disclosures, but we also sought comment from the public on whether it should be deleted from the forms in the proposed rule. The comments came back from industry pretty much unanimous that this disclosure would be confusing to consumers, but with the consumer testing record that we had, with consumers generally understanding it, we had to leave it on the forms, unfortunately. And so it is now on page 3 underneath the APR. So I think the comparisons table goes from most useful to least useful in order from top to bottom. But I do think that if a consumer is comparing two different loans, let's say a 30-year and a 15-year fixed, that they could end up using the TIP and seeing which one is lower. I think this will be something that will get questions, create questions from consumers that loan officers will have to have responses to. So I think loan officers should really try and understand what the TIP is and how to explain it to consumers.
No doubt. So reading between the lines, this was not, the CFPB's idea. This was Congress. This is something you had to implement, and you feel, based off of what Dodd-Frank and Congress mandated, you came up with the best. But you do acknowledge the fact that it could create some confusion. Again, mortgage industry, mortgage professionals, we can't change it. This is what we have to deliver to families. The 5-year cost over 5 years is something we should be passionate about. And I hope everybody on this call can really be passionate about that. And then I hope, that when you do come to a family with TIP, we're going to help you guys provide, inspiration and understanding around that. So, Richard, what do you think the ranges are going to be with TIP? What do you think the low and the high is going to be? Because I'm sure you've looked at that under a number of situations.
Yeah. So if for example, in this loan, I think in this slide the interest rate was probably around 4%. I don't remember the exact sample that I took this one from, but the interest rate is probably around 4%. When we get back up to more historical averages, that tip could go over 100% easily, and so you're going to end up having a very large percentage number compared to the APR that's right above it. And so I definitely think that drastic difference, that stark difference between the two percentages is going to be what's going to create the consumer questions. Again, as I mentioned earlier in this call, these forms require new vocabulary and a new understanding of what's on them, and I think this is an important area for loan officers to be prepared to explain. And so I think that it's worth putting in some time to come up with some explanations of that amount for consumers.
No doubt. So mortgage coach community, this is an opportunity. You are among the most successful, and you're all the heart of a teacher. You wouldn't invest in mortgage coach, you wouldn't be on this call if you didn't want to be an educator and teacher to families. So let's come up with some scripting together around this. For anybody on this call, and I network with some of the most successful loan officers in America, forward me, what are you going to say to families when they ask what is TIP? And how are you, what are the talking points and what are the vocabulary you're going to use? Let's crush this together. And of course, we've already got some great scripts when it comes to the cost over 5 years and how you bring this into a family to help them make a better decision. So Richard, let's kind of transition a bit into that pre-LE conversation. I've got a few things to show, but before I walk through the mortgage coach total cost experience, what's the CFPB's position on the consistency of quoting rates and the pre-LE experience and conversation?
That's a great question. As I think all the compliance personnel on the call know, the CFPB is very interested in fair lending issues, and I think that having a consistent approach to quoting costs for loans and imposing costs for loans definitely is something the CFPB would be interested in from a fair lending perspective. But I also think, on top of fair lending, there's a potential UDAP issue as well. Especially if the clarity of the quotes that you're giving, the clarity of the educational information between different consumers or different classes of consumers changes. And so I think that's providing a consistent, not only cost quotes to consumers, but also the format and the quality of the information, I think, is important for lenders.
No doubt. So. And getting to the heart of it, I think it always starts with, what is your mission statement as a mortgage professional? What is your why? And again, Kelly Zitlow, I was out training her branch a few weeks ago in Scottsdale, and then I had her as a guest last Tuesday. I mean, this is a great mission. My mission is to deliver an honest, well-communicated, knowledge-based lending experience. I mean, if that is your why, you're off to a good start when it comes to having a great pre-LE conversation that's both TRID compliant, CFPB compliant, and is an advantage in the marketplace. By the way, if anybody else on this call, you have, just a really tight, this is what I'm all about, share that in questions. I would like to get some examples from other mortgage coach members that are doing that. And Richard, feel free to jump in. You and I, in preparation for this call, you're familiar with the mortgage coach total cost analysis. If you have something you want to highlight, feel free to add. But I guess the most important thing for every mortgage coach on this call is that consistency. In the past, when you had a family that really pushed you, call it the grinder, the rate shopper, you gave them your A game and you used the mortgage coach total cost. You delivered it. You had graphs and charts around how you delivered it. You showed the cost over time, because that's something we've been doing since we founded the company 18 years ago. And over 30% of you now, you're adding a video, you're narrating with just a minute, just highlighting some key elements in the mortgage. So, one of my goals is that you're not just doing this for some families, you're doing this for all families. When you're a mortgage coach, you want to deliver an educational experience to families. This needs to be done for everyone. Richard, anything, knowing that you're talking to loan officers, you're talking to branch managers, you're talking to heads of production, any message that you have for them?
I think you hit it right on the head. It's the most important message, I think, is to bring your A game to every consumer. These forms, not only are they more understandable, and so they'll create more questions because of that reason, but they're also potentially going to be provided earlier in the process because of the rules revising the definition of application to just 6 items. And so these forms will be provided earlier to consumers. So this, for both of these reasons, I think the forms will end up creating more questions, and I think you need to be ready to explain clearly to consumers the costs. And also, if the forms do increase the level of activation or the consumer's desire to negotiate the cost in the transaction, I think you need to be able to explain the different options to consumers clearly. And to win over your customers, I think you need to be able to handle the new vocabulary on the forms with ease, because again, I don't think you want to be caught flat-footed trying to explain the tip or some other new part of the forms that you don't quite understand, and then lose that level of trust you have with the customer. So I think it's preparation and bring your A game.
Beautiful. And I would just remind everybody, it's time to use the video feature more than ever, because it is going to be more educational. It's going to be more complex. It needs to be more accurate and precise. And let's face it, every time someone gets a loan, it's not just one person, the person that you met with. There's a husband, there's a wife, there's an influencer, a buddy at work that's invested in real estate, and you've got to communicate to all of them. And I also really put a strong push that it needs to start earlier in the process. So, I mean, we've been providing Mortgage Coach, what we call open house experiences, for years now, where the loan officer forwards the link to the realtor, and the realtor has that on display in the open house. You've got to start really thinking of yourself as an educator, not a salesperson. You're not out selling products, selling loans, selling rates. You're educating people. And let's face it, the best realtors, they want to work with a loan officer that is delivering a more educational experience. Ken DeLeon, the #1 realtor in America, who I interviewed several weeks ago, paraphrased, most loan officers' marketing is noise. It's, the most valuable is tailored, it's personalized. And he went on to endorse a Mortgage Coach TCA as a great way to be valuable for realtors. So, I think, it's important for every mortgage coach to understand we've got to be more accurate. We've got to deliver better borrower understanding. We've got to do transparency better than we have in the past. So hopefully everybody will step up and deliver their A game to every family. By the way, I'll put a link to this. I started promoting this a couple of weeks ago, but it's a 2-minute, I call it a rant, where I was at my friend's office, the RE Source guys, Ryan and RC, and I was making some videos for them, and I made this video for the Mortgage Coach community because it's just what's in my heart right now. TRID is a great opportunity to deliver more value to families and to do it in a way that's a competitive advantage with realtors. And I do believe that a lot of realtors are going to change loan officers. They don't like tension, they don't like delayed closings, and let's face it, with TRID we're going to have all of that. So it's time to really bring your A game and have a competitive advantage. So Richard, I know in preparation for this, you and I had a couple things that we thought everybody should read. I'll let you provide color around this. I have up here both this link, Owning a Home, and the Home Loan Toolkit, because I want to make sure every mortgage professional is prepared. So if you could provide your perspective on what are in these documents, and why should mortgage professionals go out and go to the source, go to the CFPB, which, by the way, I'll say it again, and I've said it before, it is the best website, the best online presence, the best educational experience for families of any government agency. I mean, has anybody even come close to delivering this much value online? So, Richard, what is your, kind of push to loan officers to go out and read this stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, the bottom of page 1 of the loan estimate, so the most important page of the loan estimate, probably the page where many consumers might just stop reading because it really gives them all the information they need. At the bottom of this page is a link to the CFPB's website for the loan estimate. It's www.consumerfinance.gov/mortgage estimate. That page, I think they've already put it up, provides very clear, as you mentioned, Dave, very user-friendly, consumer-friendly information about the loan estimate. It explains each and every, well, not every single part, but most of the parts of the loan estimate with call-outs. So a consumer can hover their mouse over a part of the loan estimate, and it gives the consumer more information about that part of the loan estimate. It even suggests questions that the consumer should ask about the information on that part of the loan estimate. And then it also provides definitions for some of the more difficult parts of the loan estimate and potentially terminology that might confuse consumers, like balloon payment or prepayment penalty. But that page is not just about the loan estimate. It's also it's a part of the CFPB's Owning a Home website, which I think you may have all heard about or seen. The CFPB's Owning a Home website explains to the consumer the process of purchasing and financing a home. And it even includes a much maligned tool called the rate checker tool, which gives the consumer an idea of the different rates that are out there in their market. And so this loan estimate is essentially pointing consumers to that page, which then consumers can use to see whether the rate that is on that loan estimate is higher or lower than what the CFPB says are the average rates in their market area. So I think that's something that's very important for loan officers to check out, to see what consumers might be looking at in addition to the loan estimate that they receive. And the other piece of information is the new essentially settlement cost booklet that the CFPB is going to require to be provided with the loan estimate, which they've called your home loan toolkit. This home loan toolkit is a regulatory requirement. It has to be provided with the loan estimate. It's the same time frame as the loan estimate, but also the CFPB is urging loan officers to even provide it earlier in the process and to even make it available on websites or just as a pamphlet in offices. So this home loan toolkit, I think, is definitely something else you might want to check out to see what other information the CFPB is giving to consumers. Remember, the loan estimate does not have any educational information on it. It essentially points borrowers and requires them to go seek educational information from other sources. And I think these are two very important sources that you want to take a look at to see what information consumers might have before they call up or send you an email about something they have a question about.
So folks, we put links to a few of these things in chat. So I saw some questions. Where are the links? Go to chat. Also, I mean, do some Google searches. You know, type this stuff in. This is recorded. You'll be able to re-listen to it. It is time to go to school. Between now and end of the month when TRID hits, the loan officer that has read the most, the loan officer that has been most intentional about really resetting, you know, what's my why? You know, am I really an educator and a teacher, or am I a salesperson, sales guy or gal that sells rates and loans? You know, if you are an educator of families, you are gonna, I mean, TRID is just gonna be awesome for you because it is a better disclosure. There are some new opportunities to provide leadership. You know, by the way, we have gotten just blown up with questions, Richard. I don't know if you have access to that part of it, but I mean, there's over 30 questions posted. So first of all, thank you everybody for participating. And I don't want to put Richard on the spot in this call, but I am going to try to get him back in, whether it's a Tuesday call or maybe Richard and I just jump on a call and we record something that answers some of these. But you know, Richard, we can talk about that after the call. I do want to make sure we address the fact that you can expect that people are going to, they're going to be more educated. The CFPB wants families to be more educated, and they are going to be shopping you more. I mean, by the way, Richard, you align, I mean, that's part of the CFPB's goal is for the family to not only understand their options, but to go out and shop their loan more than they are right now. If you could speak to that.
Yeah. So the CFPB has basically instructed consumers to go out and shop for loans in a number of different places. On their owning a home website, for example, it tells consumers to go out and get other loan estimates and shop rates between different lenders to make sure they're getting the lower rate. I think the Home Loan Toolkit also has information about shopping for consumers, and I think that it, in conjunction with the new TRID effective date, October 3rd, the CFPB is likely to put out a consumer education campaign where that might be a centerpiece, because these forms, as you mentioned, they were designed to educate consumers to ensure that they can understand their loans, and if consumers can understand their loans, they'll feel more empowered to go out and shop for loans. And I think the CFPB is really going to promote that idea of consumers using these new understandable disclosures to go out and shop between lenders. I think what's important to remember is that also the forms are going to be provided earlier in the process in many cases, so the consumers will have more of an opportunity to shop. And there are also fee restrictions in the rule like there are currently, so it might not make a huge difference, but there are restrictions on imposing fees before you provide a loan estimate and get an intent to proceed from the customer. And there's also restrictions on requiring verifying documents like W-2s, pay stubs, but even purchase and sale contracts before you provide the loan estimate. So you can't require any of that information before you provide the loan estimate. So what the CFPB is trying to do with this rule is to create an opportunity for consumers to shop around with the loan estimate. And so I think you better believe that they'll be promoting that idea when TRID is launched on October 3rd.
I love it. I love it. So folks, there are some things that the industry will be critical of. I would urge everybody to focus the water cooler talk around how do we turn this into our advantage, how do we raise the bar in our processes, and how we deliver a great consumer experience, and how we turn this into an advantage. Richard's been gracious enough to put his slides in the handout section. Also, Kelly Zitlow's document and a few call it training tools from the mortgage coach are there. Also, for everybody on this call that uses the Knowledge Coop, I mean, we've got a lot of customers that use the Knowledge Coop. The recording of this call will be available in the Knowledge Coop. And for anybody that's on this call who has an enterprise relationship with us, where you're a partner, or any executive or compliance people on this call, if you want some mortgage coach training content to help train your loan officers, reach out to me personally at Dave at Mortgage Coach. We want to help your loan officers be prepared for having that conversation with families, having that conversation with realtors. So Richard, as we wrap this up, we're really dedicated, as you know, to delivering a modern mortgage experience. That means it's mobile, it's video. What's your take on the importance of mortgage professionals upping the game at how they deliver a mobile experience and a video experience within the educational process? What's your personal opinion on that?
My personal opinion, I think it's a great idea to access the younger millennial borrowers. They're the ones who are looking at YouTube all day, who don't really read news articles. They just read a headline or watch a short news clip. They're interested in that 1-minute take on something, and so because they're so used to watching short videos like on YouTube, I think that's a great way to access them, to make sure they're looking at the educational information that you want them to have. We designed the paper disclosures to be able to be used by consumers who put the time into reading them, but we knew that we couldn't change consumer behavior. So there are going to be consumers who are not going to want to sit and read a paper document, and so it might be useful to have videos at the ready to be able to provide that educational information to them.
Beautiful. So push to all mortgage coaches. It's time now more than ever to get out your mobile devices, in the pre-LE conversation, deliver a mortgage coach experience. I mean, it's important right now that everybody goes to school on your workflow. What are you doing to deliver a great customer experience? And what is that customer experience? What are the scripts that you're using? And how are you more accurate than ever? How does the borrower understand it better than ever? And there's more transparency. That is leadership. So, Richard, we are at the top of the hour. A couple more reminders for the mortgage coach community. We do training calls every day of the week. There's something going on. We've got Monday, which is Introduction to Mortgage Coach for anybody who's new on this call or you haven't created 20 mortgage coach experiences. Every Tuesday, I'm interviewing a guest. I hope Richard is a guest again. Every Wednesday, it's all about mobile. It's about how to pull out your mobile device while talking to a realtor or a family and share a strategy, help them understand how you deliver better value. Thursday's technical training, and every day there is training. So if you could, as you leave today's call, let us know what you thought of today's call. If you are a guest and you want to learn more about Mortgage Coach, click that bottom option, and we'll make sure that we reach out and schedule a demo or some type of information. Richard, as we wrap it up, what are any last words of wisdom for mortgage professionals that are on today's call?
I think what you said earlier really hit the nail on the head. It was bring your A game for your customers, each and every customer, and also be ready for TRID. Take the time to do the preparation to make sure that your A game is as good as your A game can be on October 3rd.
Love it, love it. Well, folks, thanks for taking the time to improve, how you're going to go to market post-TRID. Keep asking questions. Whether it's Richard or other folks, we want to get all your questions answered. We want to help you, and we want to help you deliver a better experience to families. So have a great day, have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Oh, and lastly, for heads of compliance, executives, I've got Richard's phone number right and his email right. Is there any other way that you want people to reach out or connect with you, Rich?
You can also check out my website, www.richhornlegal.com, and it has my contact information there. But thanks for correcting that phone number. That was great. I feel bad for the other guy if he's already gotten some calls.
Right on. Hey, take care, everybody. Have a fantastic week.